in this session addressing school-related gender-based violence learning series, which is organized by the Global Campaign for Education. This is part of a series of webinars that are celebrating the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. Yes, I will start this conversation very quickly, inviting or going through the agenda of this morning. For the opening and context setting, we will have Julie Juma coming from the Global Campaign for Education. Then we will hear Lydia Madiarapanze. She will speak about school-related gender-based violence fact sheet. She will present this. And then we will hear Chrissy Hart from Together for Girls. She will speak about evidence-based research on this topic, some gaps and challenges, and also the needs that have to be done to enhance prevention and responses to school-related gender-based violence. Then we will hear Remy Shawa from UNESCO ESAVRO, who will speak about experiences that can be drawn from using Connect with Respect. This is a classroom toolkit across different regions. Finally, we will hear Zainab Aldemir Koyuzunko from Mongai, who will discuss a little bit about the major experiences and lessons learned on whole school approaches and how civil society organizations can influence and practice. And then we will hear Gina Pancorbo from Education International about the role of teachers in classroom to advance and protect school-related gender-based violence. We will have interpretation into all languages, official languages from GCE. So if you need to hear in your own language, you can press the globe that is on the bottom of this screen, and you will find the languages. And that's it. I'm very happy to be here and to invite Julie Juma for this opening and context setting. You will have 5 minutes, Julie, and I will be very restricted to this time. I will let you know.
Thank you very much, Laura, for welcoming me to speak. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. I would like to welcome you all as well to this webinar, which we are looking at school-related gender-based violence. And as GCE, we are happy to join the rest of the world during the 16 days of activism to host this webinar, which we are going to talk about school-related gender-based violence. As you are aware, school-related gender-based violence is defined as acts or threats of sexual, physical, or psychological violence occurring in and around schools, perpetrated as a result of harmful gender norms and stereotypes and enforced by unequal power dynamics. So there are 246 million children who experience school-related gender-based violence with serious impacts on their physical and mental health, well-being, and educational attainment. So the increase in the unmonitored usage of telephones, computers, other electronic gadgets, and the internet by learners in schools exposes them to cyberbullying, which has a gendered dimension. Learners of other genders, sexual orientation, gender expression, identities, and characteristics face more forms of violence, including name-calling, discrimination, bullying while at school. So globally, around 45% of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and trans youth report being bullied at school. So this is a very serious situation that needs to be addressed. So whilst we have organizations that are implementing classroom-based approaches for teachers and school leaders, interventions targeting non-teaching staff, and whole school approaches, SRGBV remains a complex challenge for the education sector. There are large gaps in research and knowledge about the complexities and nuances of SRGBV as a result of lack of available data within the education sector. So this lack of information impacts heavily on the ability of civil society organizations to advocate for policies and practices that effectively contribute to the prevention and response to school-related gender-based violence. And as you may all be aware as well, that GCE has a gender strategy that is informing our gender transformative education work that we are doing and the work that we are also planning to do going forward. So this webinar today is part of a learning series that GCE is embarking on. And this is the first, and this will continue in January 2024. So this webinar also seeks to enhance the capacity of the National Education Coalitions to pick up these issues at country level and advocate for an end to school-related gender-based violence. We have some experts who have been working on school-related gender-based violence on the panel. So they will share with us quite a lot of information, statistics, and issues that are happening around the globe on school-related gender-based violence. So these issues should be picked up at national level and advocacy around those issues taking place. So this session will facilitate dialogue around the general understanding of the gendered aspect of violence in schools, the school ecosystem, current SRGBV interventions, and key policy issues for GCE members to take up for influencing ministries of education to prevent and respond to violence in schools. I also wanted to share with you that as GCE, we also have a gender learning community. So I would like to encourage you to join this gender learning community so that you get more information on gender in general, as well as on the school-related gender-based violence. Thank you very much, Laura. I think I'll stop here.
Thank you, Julie, for bringing all this data or the lack of information and data, and also for bringing us the opportunities in GCE also to address this topic. So now I will invite Lydia. Lydia, this is the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So I will start by defining what school-related gender-based violence is about. So as Julie also indicated, these are acts or threats of sexual, physical, or psychological violence that occurs in and around schools, perpetrated as a result of harmful gender norms and stereotypes, and informed by unequal power dynamics. So this definition was adopted from UNGAI. So SRGBV can occur across gender lines, that is between boys and girls, or within the same gender group, amongst female students or male students. This may also occur between teachers and learners. Then research has shown that in general, boys tend to be more frequently involved in sexual violence or bullying and as victims or perpetrators. At the same time, girls are more prone to verbal and psychological violence and are more at risk of sexual violence. It is also important for us to note that children with disabilities are more likely to be bullied than their peers without disabilities, and girls with disabilities also experience more sexual violence at school. Then it's also critical to note that conflict, crisis, and marginalized populations in their diversity are at a greater risk of violence in schools. I'll speak to the forms of violence that are experienced. There are more forms of violence further than physical, psychological, and emotional. You hear of emotional violence, you hear of many other forms, but for the purpose of this webinar, I'll speak to physical violence. So this includes verbal abuse related to puberty, emotional manipulation, labeling of learners, spreading false rumors, bullying, teasing, cyberbullying, sexist language, intimidation, and many others. Then in terms of sexual violence, this is indecent touching, aggressive sexual behavior, sexual advances or exposure, unwanted acts or gestures, groping, fondling, and touching, asking for sexual favors, rape, defilement, or incest. Then when we speak to physical school-related gender-based violence, this may include hitting, punching, choking, shaking, manual labor, corporal punishment, or caning. So there are quite a number of these examples of sexual violence. But it is also important for us to note that there are legal conventions that exist that are binding in terms of SRGBV. So the UN Convention on the Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women is one such convention. Then the UN Convention on the Rights of Children is also one such convention that speaks to include all forms of exploitation and sexual abuse. We go on to speaking to political commitments, the Beijing Platform of 1995, our SDG 4s also speak to issues of violence and equitable access to education. Then the Transforming Education Summit of 2022 also has a call to action on advancing gender equality. Then we also speak to a call for action on protection from GBV in emergencies, the 2021 to 2025 roadmap. But over and above this, it is important that at national level, we look at the Constitution, what it says, the policies, circulars, frameworks that may have specific forms of violence. For example, some may speak to corporal punishment, sexual violence, and for education activists and CSOs, it is important to establish what in their country is existing and what informs advocacy on school-related gender-based violence. I'll speak briefly to exposure and experiencing violence and what it does to learners or to children. So in their education, this comprises of the cognitive and emotional development, which is affected when one experiences or is exposed to SRGBV. So it speaks to poor performance, low concentration levels, absenteeism from school, and any other school-related activities, be it sports, be it any extracurricular activities. When learners also experience SRGBV, it affects them physically. So the physical harm that happens to their bodies and to their mental health, which may result in injuries, substance misuse, sexually transmitted infections, and HIV. The mental health of learners is also affected when they experience SRGBV, in that it leads to depression, anger, hostility, suicide, self-harm, resentment, and anxiety. Lastly, when learners experience violence, they also become violent to others. They bully others, they fight others because they've experienced one form of violence. In the long term, witnessing or experiencing violence as a child is linked to future use or acceptance of violence as a normal cycle of life. So this was quoted from UNESCO. A lot of data, Julie has already spoken to it, that 246 million children in the world experience SRGBV every year. This is 2016 figure, and I'm sure by now it has since increased. So UNICEF 2017 and 2014 also speaks to estimates of the share of children and youth impacted by bullying and school violence, which ranges from 10 to 65%. The world over, close to 130 million students aged between 13 and 15 also experience bullying. Research has also shown that SRGBV not only affects students' psychological well-being, but it is also related to low enrollment and attendance, school dropouts, low achievement, and thus poses as a human right violation and also affects economic development of any country. It is also important to note that SRGBV is a bit difficult to measure in that there are large gaps in research and also knowledge about the complexities of SRGBV and the nuances of SRGBV. So being a multifaceted complex, there are different understandings of what is considered violence and violence in schools. The different understandings of social perceptions of violence could lead to unrecognized and normalize acts of violence. So you'll find that there are acts of violence that are seen as normal. For example, certain language use in the classroom may be seen as normal because the teacher or the classroom instructor is not aware that their language use is actually a violation. And so this leads to underreporting. Learners may never report that because they think it's a normal act, preventing researchers from analyzing the real extent of SRGBV. So most assessments either gather data on gender disaggregated data on victims or perpetrators of violence in schools, but they do not systematically collect data on the gendered nature of violence. And I'm sure as you go through this webinar, we are also going to receive more from those who are on the ground actually implementing and doing research around SRGBV. SRGBV and violence in general are delicate issues. SRGBV is personal and subjective experience that is embedded in held beliefs about gender, childhood, and rights. This lack of information may also impact on the ability of organizations and governments to effectively prevent and address school-related gender-based violence. So in closing, I will speak to some of the good practices or promising practices that are already in existence that have been done by quite a number of organizations. So you'll find that they are school-based programs, the right to play, working with men and boys. There are community-based programs, parenting programs, programs that focus on comprehensive sexuality education, gender-responsive or gender-transformative curriculum and teaching methodologies, curriculum-based approaches. For example, we're going to listen to UNESCO speak to us about the experiences with the Connect with Respect toolkit. We're also going to listen to Ungai speak to whole school approaches. And then there are other approaches like the Good Schools Toolkit by Rising Voices in Uganda. Lights for Violence also developed a cluster of activities with Europe and American universities. So this webinar will also share what is coming out of research on SRGBV, good practices and existing gaps to enhance policy and programming. I thank you.
Thank you, Lydia. Thank you for sharing with us the panorama of gender-based violence at schools. Also to point some differences of how violence affects differently boys and girls, and probably also teachers. We will hear at the end also some topics related to this, also to remind us the legal and political framework and the consequences of gender-based violence at schools. I invite two colleagues to write on the chat some comments, questions that you might have. And meanwhile, I cannot see Chrissy Hart. Are you here, Chrissy? No, from Together for Girls. No, maybe she will join later. So I would like to invite Remy Shawa from UNESCO ESARO to share with us what civil society organizations can do to influence governments and how to use this Connect with Respect classroom toolkit across in different regions. So thank you, Remy, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Laura. I hope that you can hear me just fine. Greetings from Harare. We are attending the AIDS conference for Africa. So quickly, I'm just going to share a little bit about the Connect with Respect tool, which is a curriculum-based approach to preventing gender-based violence in schools, and it targets learners in upper primary and early secondary school. it was designed to really help students to understand the key concepts such as gender violence, gender-based violence, respectful relationships, and so on, and to be able to equip learners to name the behavior. So when they see or experience violence, to be able to name what kind of violence it is. And this is a partnership of UNESCO, UN Women, ANGA, Unite, UNICEF, and Plan International. It was developed in the Asia Pacific and then adapted to the Eastern Southern African region after a pilot. So when you look at the two, it has 3 parts and 7 topics. These are the ones that are on the screen: understanding gender and gender equality. We have raising awareness about gender-based violence, and then it dives into gender-based violence itself, violence in general, and then school-related gender-based violence. And another part, which is one of my favorites, is really developing skills for respectful relationships. And this is equipping the learners with communication skills for respectful relationships, issues around when they do witness violence, what do they do, help seeking, and so forth and so on. Just to say that this is a tool made to enable the teacher to assist learners in preventing school-related gender-based violence. So the tool itself it does 2 things. One, it sort of equips and changes the teacher's own attitudes and ideas about violence and gender-based violence in particular. But secondly, it gives the teacher the tools, then the actual activities that they can do with the learners in the classroom. So if you pick one part and then you pick one topic, you'll find in that topic there's about 2 to 3 activities. There's also an optional game. There are some optional assignments that learners can do when they go back to their homes with their parents or with the community members. The pilot of the 2, when we were revising, it was done in our region here in Eastern Southern Africa. It was focusing on Eswatini, formerly Swaziland, Zambia, Tanzania, and Zimbabwe. And then also Thailand, Vietnam, which unfortunately did not finish, and Timor-Leste. The pilot wanted to find out a few things. One, the factors that constrained or enabled implementation. We also wanted to find out the impacts of the program on students' own attitudes and relationships, as well as behaviors. But also what was key was to know from the teachers and the students their perceptions about the contribution that the Connect with Respect would have to relationships in the school and in the classroom, to gender and gender equality. Some of the challenges that we experienced and what we were learning, the fact that the degrees of implementation varied from country to country. Others, followed it to the T. Others skipped some lessons and activities. The fidelity was not the same. But also COVID-19 and the closures that it brought affected the pilot in the case of Zimbabwe. So just briefly, some of the lessons we got from the pilot: we saw an increase in knowledge of how to seek help regarding gender-based violence, an increase from 44% to 65% pre and post-intervention. We also saw an increase in intention to seek help for self, that is, those who are affected by gender-based violence. Some of the things that we learned from the students, and in terms of what they found useful in the tool, learning about human rights for both males and females was an important example for the learners. Understanding effects of gender-based violence, understanding communication about feelings and emotions, as well as getting help for those affected. Some of the key messages Students value and recommend the Connect with Respect. So it's even now when we continue to roll out in countries, we've rolled out in Malawi, in Lesotho, in Botswana, you see an appreciation from the learners. Despite implementation barriers, the program had positive impacts on student knowledge, attitudes, and behavior. And we also learned that teachers need support so that it's not just a matter of training them once off, but continuously providing them access to material and resources, as well as leadership and sort of policy support at that level. There is therefore need for us to continue to strengthen the evidence base to inform advocacy and implementation. Across all pilot countries, the results of the trial are helping subsequent advocacy, scale up and guidance about areas where teachers need further support and resourcing. While we're also encouraging the different schools and the sectors, the education sectors, is that this is not a standalone tool, but really it's a tool that should complement existing efforts. So in a country which does provide comprehensive sexuality education, when they do want to handle a topic on gender or gender-based violence or violence, then the tool does have activities that the teacher can actually do with the learners. And finally, this slide just shows some of the steps we follow when we do need to implement the Connect with Respect. You reach out to the ministry, recruit the ministry that is interested, the Ministry of Education. You orient the key stakeholders in the ministry. You put in place a monitoring and evaluation team. You engage stakeholders, parents, caregivers, community leaders, and so on. You do national capacity building workshops, implementation of the Connect with Respect itself. You collect the data and so on. A good example I'd like to share is in the case of Lesotho, where it was a civil society organization that had heard of the Connect with Respect and reached out to UNESCO to say they would be interested to support the rollout of the Connect with Respect in the country. And what I'm seeing is that the tool itself is really increasing the visibility around the issue of school-related gender-based violence. And quite frankly, when we do trainings with teachers or head teachers, there is not much violence that happens in school that is not gender-based. Whether it's corporal punishment, you realize that most of them have underlying gender norms, gender stereotypes that they're perpetuating. So for me, that has been quite an important takeaway. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and I'll be here to take any questions and comments.
Thank you very much, Remy. Thank you for sharing us this toolkit for raising the importance of also understand the context, to work with education communities, to raise awareness about gender, which is a social construct, also violence, and to creating evidence to protect these subjects of rights. So now I would like to invite Zeynep Aldenir Koyuncu. She is from UNGEI, and she will share with us some experiences and lessons learned on the whole school approaches, and also how civil society organizations can influence and practice against gender-based violence. Thank you, Zeynep.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone, dear colleagues, friends. Laura, thank you very much for moderating this excellent panel today. And many thanks to the colleagues at Global Campaign for Education for inviting us to be a part of this. Before starting, I want to express my 100% agreement with Dr. Remy when you referred to the fact that very little amount of or very few types of violence is not gendered. So I think we need to acknowledge that we need to look for the gender dimension of violence wherever and whenever it happens, and in all forms that it happens. So I totally agree with that, and I think this should be our starting point when we talk about SRGBV as well. So education is in crisis in many parts of the world at the moment, and this is perpetrated by violence in and around schools. So this event is very, very timely as we are commemorating the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. Not many of you, or maybe not all of you, are familiar with UNGAI, and this is the short form, and we are the United Nations. Excuse me, I lost my connection. Okay, I'm back. So we are the United Nations Girls' Education Initiative. We are a global partnership for gender equality in and through education. We work through advocacy programs and convening. The UNGAI partnership has about 13 members, including civil society organizations and youth-led networks. GCE, Global Campaign for Education, is also a valuable partner. We champion feminist expertise, leadership, and partnerships in all the work that we do. Colleagues speaking before me have extensively elaborated on SRGBV, especially Lydia. And as requested, I will focus on the whole school approach to preventing SRGBV. As we have seen with evidence and experience, and as in many other challenges facing education, SRGBV cannot be addressed by teachers, nor by school administrations, parents, or the education community alone. That is why we are proposing the so-called whole school approach. Together with the Global Working Group to End SRGBV, UNGAI developed the minimum standards and monitoring framework to prevent SRGBV through a whole school approach in 2018. And this approach basically recognizes the interconnectedness of schools, communities, and families to prevent SRGBV and to improve the school environment. This approach, the whole school approach, is gender transformative, which means that it recognizes and tackles the power imbalances as a root cause of SRGBV, and it goes beyond the binary, and it goes beyond the gender parity approach. So I would like to briefly share my screen as I talk about the minimum standards. So the 8 minimum standards with indicators that you see on the screen, these elaborate on what is needed and suggest concrete actions for applying the whole school approach. The first standard on school leadership and community engagement, this one stresses the complementary roles in the whole school approach for prevention, the complementary role of school leadership and the community. The second standard is the existence of a code of conduct at the school level. The third one is the capacity of teachers and educational support staff for gender-responsive teaching. The fourth standard is centered on children. The next one concerns safe, accessible, child-friendly, anonymous, that's a lot, and non-retributional reporting, monitoring, and accountability. So all these elements are very important. Anonymity, being child-friendly, non-retributional, safe and accessible reporting. This links to the standard about consistent application of incident response within the school and ensuring safe physical environments. And the last standard is about engagement of parents through the school governance bodies. Let me just pull this down. So in the whole school approach, those who need to take action against SRGBV, that is to say, duty bearers are quite clear, and not but, and civil society has a pivotal role in preventing SRGBV, and especially for holding the duty bearers to account, as is also the case in all gender equality, GBV, and education spaces. For example, as part of the minimum standards, we are suggesting a specific indicator emphasizing the key role of CSOs, civil society organizations, partnering with schools to apply the minimum standards. So they need to work together, and civil society organizations should be at the center and in close partnership. The whole school approach and minimum standards were piloted in Zimbabwe, similar to the previous case, and Sierra Leone a few years ago. And our purpose was to understand whether and how the approach and the standards could be operationalized. This work was implemented on the ground by our civil society partners, FAWE Zimbabwe, FAWE in Zimbabwe, and CIFOR Humanity and Inclusion in Sierra Leone. And more concretely, in both countries, we started by visioning workshops together with the whole school to identify gaps, entry points, and practical actions to strengthen each of these 8 domains. And then, depending on the gaps identified, interventions were put in place, such as reactivating reporting and referral mechanisms, developing codes of conduct, teacher training, school clubs, national advocacy actions, extracurricular activities on gender norms, and the like. And again, all these were done either through the leadership or partnership of civil society organizations. So the findings and the trends are somewhat similar to the Connect with Respect program. So the programs are more or less aligned. So these 2 pilots in these 2 countries, combined with advocacy, led to some policy level changes. They helped shift perceptions about harmful gender norms. We saw teachers become more committed to gender equality. More girls started to take leadership roles on student councils. Student clubs improved awareness of different forms of violence, particularly inappropriate touching and sexual harassment. Parents became more engaged in prevention activities, but overall, unfortunately, still silence and stigma about GBV persisted. The pilots established or revoked reporting systems, but there is still fear of retribution, and this is preventing students from reporting the incidents. Many schools adopted codes of conduct, but these codes of conduct, they did not address all forms of violence, or they did not adopt a zero tolerance policy. So none of these could have been achieved or evidenced without the leadership and partnership of civil society organizations. And I also want to underline that the issue of SRGBV could not have made it to this level of visibility and importance within the global policy domains without civil society, without CSOs, and feminist CSOs, and women's CSOs, and the women's movement, and the LGBTQI+ movement. So I'm fully confident to emphasize this with evidence from my first-hand experience from the Global Working Group to End SRGBV, which I have the pleasure of co-leading with my colleagues from UNESCO headquarters. And this working group is in place since 2014, so it's a very long-standing collaboration and voice. So this is still unfinished business, and we have a very long way to go together. And I hope we do have many avenues and opportunities to collaborate. Thank you very much. And I will also add some links and information in the chat afterwards. Thank you. Back to you, Laura.
Thank you very much, Zainab, and also for sharing us the complexity of the whole approach. It's a mosaic of dimensions that we have to analyze, but I think this is necessary if we really want to transform education from a gender perspective. So engaging the education communities, the duty bearers, civil society. Thank you very much. Now I would like to invite Gina Pancorbo from Education International. She will speak about the role of teachers in classrooms to protect school-based related violence. But also I would like to invite you to make your questions, to think about your questions or comments. In a few minutes, we will open the microphone for the audience as well. So thank you, Gina. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Laura. I hope you hear me well. That's great. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all participants. It's a pleasure for us to be here. Thank you, the Global Campaign of Education, for inviting us. I'm going to share my screen to start my presentation. Just give me a minute, please. All right. So I'm here today representing Education International. Many of you perhaps are familiar with our role, but we are an organization that represents more than 32 million teachers and education support personnel around the globe. Today, I will talk to you about the role of teachers in classrooms to advance and protect SRGBV. It is a complex presentation, not only because there are many issues involved, but also I would like to take you to the role of teachers and the importance of having them always on the table when talking about preventing SRGBV. When we start thinking about teachers and the role they have on SRGBV, we also have to acknowledge a couple of things. On the one hand, you all may know, because of the media, because of our evidence, that teachers are perpetrators of SRGBV. You see here a couple of statistics. Male and female teachers are both perpetrators of physical violence. Our data of the VACS has showed us that, for example, in Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda, these percentages are up to 40%. In Kenya, in particular, it's up to 60% of teachers may have committed some form of physical violence to their students. There are also some report, a report of UNESCO has shown us that also girls are more likely to be victims of non-consensual sex attempts in schools when the perpetrator is a teacher. So if you see here how teachers are perpetrators, but I would just also highlight that teachers are also victims of SRGBV. Our data has shown us that, for example, around 1 in 3 participants of 26,000 teachers, educators are participating in the international survey of IBEST that seeks to understand the well-being and also the health of educators, have been victims of violence in the past 12 months in their workplace. Another piece of information from the APA Association is that 30% of educators responding to a survey to this survey in the US, reported that at least one incident of verbal and threatening violence from students during COVID. So you have here the 2 roles of teachers. According to UNGE, the majority of teachers are not perpetrators of violence, but they navigate within a complex system that introduces various stress factors. This may include, for example, poor working conditions, inadequate support from the school leadership and their administrators, demands to balance curriculum delivery with administrative tasks, restricted opportunities for professional development, and the isolation experienced when they, for example, they work in rural areas. So these all factors, could be stress issues that may affect or may contribute to the emergent violence of schools. The other slide that I have is just to highlight what is the role of teachers. As my friend Zeynep acknowledged before, you see here the whole school approach of proposed by UNCE and the partners to prevent SRGBV. And you see here that one of the key standards relate to teacher and educational staff support. That's why we believe it's crucial to engage teachers to address SRGBV. They are part of these complex systems we have to acknowledge that their voice is important. They can foster safe and gender-responsive environments in the schools, but it can also contribute to design preventive measures. So that's why I believe, and we all agree perhaps here today in this seminar, that they should be there when it comes to talk about SRGBV, when it comes to designing implementation strategies, and they need to also be there to discuss results of these strategies. I would like now to share with you what is EI doing to address SRGBV. The first thing we're doing is concerns to policy. Back in 2015, Education International adopted a resolution on SRGBV that called the organizations affiliated to our organization to advocate for reforms in curricula and teaching practices, to promote initial and continuous professional development for educators, to review their own organizational codes of conduct, codes of professional ethics, and codes of practice to prevent SRGBV, and also to collaborate with UN agencies and other strategic civil society partners working on SRGBV issues at national, regional, and global levels. And that's why we closely collaborate with UNCE, with UNESCO, with ILO, and with other different organizations to prevent SRGBV and to get our voices to a higher level. And this takes me to my next slide. What are we doing in terms of advocacy? There are a couple of things I would like to share with you and also highlight here. The first of them is our active participation in the UN's high-level panel of the teaching profession. This high-level panel was established by the UN Secretary General as a follow-up of the Transforming Education Summit in 2022 to produce a set of evidence-informed recommendations on how to deliver on the commitment that every learning has a professional, trained, qualified, and well-supported teacher who can flourish in a transformed education system. Our president, Susab Hopwood, that you see there in the picture, was a member of the other ones that you see here, and she represented the voice of teachers at this important forum. The panel so far, at this point, has already formulated action-oriented recommendations for governments, policymakers, employers, and work organizations, and other stakeholders. And in the past months, EI has actively worked to include in these recommendations that all governments should develop policies and measures to address SRGBV and ensure protection. And these will definitely be included in these recommendations that are going to be published in the beginning of next year. So definitely stay tuned, because these are important policy. This is an important policy instrument for our advocacy purposes. But we also have promoted the ratification of the Convention C-190 to prevent any kind of violence at the workplace. We do this at international, but also at the regional level. For example, in Latin America, the Feminist Network, organized by the Regional Education International Office, has been actively and continuously advocating for the ratification of C-190. I believe it was last year that Chile and Brazil already gave their intentions of ratifying the C-190, and that was definitely, like a result of the active participation of the Feminist Network there in Latin America. These are just two of the examples of how we promote our advocacy strategies, but also in continued support with other UN agencies and also the civil society organizations. And here I would like to share a third component of our work, and it's about programming. Perhaps some of you may know that EI and EI Africa in the region implemented a program called Education Unions Take Action to End SRGBV. This was like lasted for 3 years between 2016 and 2019 in person, in collaboration, and we did this in collaboration with Gender at Work and also with UNGE. The program aimed to build momentum among educational unions in Africa to take action to end SRGBV. There were unions from Ethiopia, Gambia, Kenya, Sierra Leone, Uganda, and Zambia participating. But they had especially an active role during the pandemic, because back in those days, teachers were constrained to their households. Perhaps they couldn't go to schools, they couldn't work collaboratively with their peers and also with their students there in person. And there were several instances of SRGBV, not only that where they were victims, but also they were perpetrators, but also their students were experiencing a lot of bullying and gender-based violence. So in that moment, we decided to take those learning circles online. And this proved to be very effective. And this was back in 2001 and 2002. Participants discussed how SRGBV was affecting their members and their students in this context of school closures and also in the reopening of schools. And these circles really supported union leaders to identify new strategies to address these challenges. There were a series of different meetings online. In some cases, for example, I have to share with you that there were some connectivity issues in some places, and the discussion was taken via WhatsApp, and that also helped with the discussions and also providing supports to affiliates. But there were some key things that enabled this strategy, and we believe that it was like the feminist approach that they was followed. And it was like basically based on active listening, respect, ownership, and also mutual trust. The online learning circles were a safe space that enabled participants to discuss the difficult topics of bullying, harassment, corporal punishment, for example, or even sexual assault. They discuss also different forms of SRGBV, how they emerged the pandemic, and they also help each other to strategize on how to prevent or tackle the instances of SRGBV in their schools or even in their communities. Education unions that were involved in this program have now continued the work to end SRGBV at the national level, and they were including, for example, offering training to their members, mainstreaming the work on SRGBV in all union activities, and also engaging in advocacy and awareness-raising activities to support victims. There are some unions, for example, in Gambia, Sierra Leone, South Africa, Ethiopia, and Kenya that we know that they are continuing their work to end gender-based violence. I'm just sharing here a quote that we believe, it really reflects the impact of this program. And one of the participants said that the roots of gender-based violence are deep, old, and widespread. No single activist has all the answers. Solidarity is essential to amplify our voices and solidify our actions. Gender-based violence in one school is a threat to all the schools within that community and beyond. We must therefore unite our efforts. Not only then we can be sure of sustained programs. And that is what we believe. To actually make sustained and also successful programs, we need to take into account a whole school approach where teachers have a voice and also their unions. I would just like to share in my one of my last slides some of the lessons learned from this project that perhaps can help others to replicate or also have as an example this interesting strategy. It was important for us to build on previous skills and experiences that they were gained by our unions there in the region. That is, we build momentum. It is also important to create safe and open spaces where participants, especially teachers and education support personnel, can feel held, comfortable, and also can trust others. And they can also share their own experiences of gender-based violence. we should follow also principles of active listening, respect and ownership, and also mutual trust when we create these safe spaces. And we should always use technology in our favor. Zoom, in this case, was our basic strategy and also our basic tool. But it is possible that WhatsApp, it could also be a help to share some experiences and enable our dialogue. We should also engage with feminist networks, as we did, for example, in Africa. And we are now engaging with the Latin American network, to their coordinators, to make the work possible and facilitate a follow-up. And I would just take on the words of Zeynep and our colleague from UNESCO, that it's important to also collect evidence, to build data, to rely on evidence that we can use in our favor for our other advocacy strategies. And just in my last slide, I will leave you with a QR code where you can that you can scan to see other documents that we have shared. I'm happy to receive some questions or comments in the next section. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gina, for sharing with us this experience. Also, raising an awareness about the role of teachers in terms of perpetrators, but also victims of gender-based violence. I would like just to check if Chris's Heart is here to share with us also some research on this topic. I don't think so. So probably we can open the mic to the audience. I don't know if anyone would like to raise questions, comments. You can just raise your hand and speak. I don't see anyone. So maybe taking advantage of being with the microphone, I would like to make one question for the panelists. Maybe I would like to see if you have some recommendations to fight against gender-based violence at schools, but thinking about the short time, the medium term, and the long term, because I think that maybe there are some different strategies that we can adopt, thinking about when the violence is taking place at schools at the short term, and also more longer term responses that we can envision. So maybe we can follow the same order of interventions. So first, I don't know if Julie or Lydia, you want to respond. No, I don't see. So maybe let's hear Dr. Remy Shawa.
Thank you, Laura. Remy is just fine. I think that in the short term, and it's quite interesting that you've asked that question, because in one of the activities we do in the Connect with Respect with the learners is to ask them, what can they do when the violence is happening and then after the violence and so on. And I think that for me is a good strategy to sort of equip the learners and the young people in the school environment to be able to take on different roles, whether it's a role of confiding into an adult when they witness violence, or speaking to a parent or speaking to a teacher, or even speaking to a fellow learner to be able to support them. But also, like we heard earlier from colleagues, that a whole school approach is important in addressing school-related gender-based violence. And that obviously in the long term has to look at the policy frameworks that we have in place. Zainab mentioned the codes of conduct that we do have in certain countries. And countries like South Africa have begun to put in place like a database for sexual offenders, who need to be in that database so that they're not employed within the education system and so on. So in the long term, there's quite a number of strategies that we can do for both response and prevention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zainab.
Thank you, Laura, for the very interesting question. I believe what is short-term, medium-term, and long-term can differ from context to context. So I want to approach it from the timelines of the response and prevention. So what I want to say is perhaps the short-term action should be geared towards responding to SRGBV by establishing the necessary mechanisms, referral, monitoring, reporting, and persecution. So that in the long term, we no longer have to talk about response, but we talk about prevention. So that we can only and exclusively focus on prevention. So prevention and response currently goes simultaneously. But what I would like to see, I don't know how many years from today, that we only talk about prevention. And that's the case for all types of gender-based violence.
Thank you very much, Zainab. Gina, do you want to complement?
Yes, thank you very much, Laura. Yeah, I will also, see how these recommendations could play out in the short and medium term, as Zainab was mentioning. First, perhaps, tackling the response approach in the beginning. I believe it is important for all the actors in the school settings to acknowledge the problem, acknowledge that this is something that is affecting who and how, and but this should be based on dialogue and open spaces, safe spaces, where they could all think about how the different actors in the school are being impacted, and also create the awareness of how to design different strategies on what is important, what to prioritize in order to prevent what is happening, but also to respond on what is already going on in the school. But I believe this dialogue should be definitely have the participation of the different stakeholders. So in that sense, for example, students representatives, union representatives, for example, also representatives of the government, depending on the instance that we are talking about, and school principals. So following the whole school approach, they should all be represented in order to strategize on what could be the response, but also how we can start to think about prevention. And when talking about the medium and long term in terms of prevention, we believe it's important to tackle the basic needs, I would say, in this case, of the school, but also of teachers and education support personnel. We are now experiencing a very hard financial crisis, where several of the budgets are being cut nationally, and that has a great impact on how much is allocated not only for schools, but also for all sorts of programs that their objective is to seek for the well-being of students and teachers. So I feel like these are basic things we should not forget, because these are the conditions that are behind perhaps some of the problems that are systematic in the schools. So I was just thinking about these two ideas for now, and that's just what came to my mind, unless there's other questions I'd like to follow up.
Thank you very much, Gina. I see Serafim Molina's hand. So maybe, Serafini, if you want just to open your microphone and make your question or comment. Serafin? We can't hear you. Maybe your microphone is closed.
Laura, I
No.
believe she has posted her question in the Q&A box. That's what I see from
Sorry.
here.
Where is it? Maybe colleagues from GCE, you can help me
Can
here?
I
Yes.
read it for you?
Yes,
It says,
please, Julie.
what are some successful initiatives done across the globe that address GBV from the grassroots? I think it's very important that all our efforts to come up with responsive and strategic ways must be rooted from culture, how the society accepts it, and have lens that looking into small avenue where these are.
Thank you,
I've just read
Julie.
it the way she has posted it.
Yes, now I saw it. Thank you very
Yeah.
much, Julie. So, do you want to respond, Julie, or not? No? So maybe let's change the order.
The
Go
question
ahead.
has gone.
There is, I think that Zainab is already answering, but if you want to speak
Okay.
a little,
All right. Okay.
maybe if you want to just to complement Zainab, let's change the order. Maybe you can start. No? Or Gina, if you want.
Yes. I would not have in mind right now, like a specific example. As Zainab, perhaps she has linked some useful resources. You could also check our resources at EI. I believe any strategy should definitely, tackle the pervasive gender norms that sometimes exist in some cultures, but also the systemic barriers that are grow there. So there is definitely acknowledgement and awareness that this is continuously affecting the episodes of gender-based violence, not only in schools but also in communities. And this goes beyond what happens in these settings. It goes beyond what happens nationally. It is a big problem internationally. I believe I'm just gonna briefly mention here that what I believe in the toolkit of the Connect with Respect is very useful in terms of like building skills in our learners skills of respect, of trust, of empathy, because these skills are important for any individual to promote not only peace but also a safe environment wherever they are. Also, a comprehensive sexual education is a basic tool that all schools should implement to tackle these gender norms and these other kinds of barriers that are experienced in schools.
Thank you very much, Gina. Remy, do you want to complement?
No, thank you. I think Gina has put it very well. What we're seeing in our region is really just a sort of a generalized acceptance of violence, right? A culture of acceptance of violence. And I think the education sector has a critical role to play, because that's where, a lot of social norms are formed. I mean, most of us as parents, we struggle to convince our children if we say something that's contrary to what the teacher has said. just showing the important role that schools and teachers and people that are in the school environment play. And so for me, I think as we address this issue, it has to be almost everyone. It's sort of shifting the culture itself. And whether or not that education system upholds and delivers good quality CSC, I think even in biology, in math, in the way that in the examples we give, in civic education and so on, there's so much room in beginning to shift and change. Our social and gender norms. And then lastly, also, I think the media, we don't quite utilize it a lot in beginning to really push back on some of the negative notions and beginning to change the notions of masculinities and feminities and so on. So that would also be, another thing to look at. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Remy, for
Laura, can I add something?
Sure.
Yeah, I think the question was talking about the grassroots involvement. Yeah, so I think it is really very important to involve the communities as well in this, if we are to end gender-based violence. From my own experience on working on ending gender-based violence in schools, engaging the parents, the community leaders, the boys and girls together is very effective, because like some of the interventions that you can do together with the community leaders, once they get that awareness, they understand the importance of preventing gender-based violence, they do mobilize and take action to ensure that this is not happening. I remember some of the interventions that we did in Malawi. The community leaders as well as the parents were able to form groups that were monitoring the way to school and back to ensure that children are safe on the way to school and back from school. And also they were taking action in their community to sensitize everybody on the evils of gender-based violence. So really starting from that grassroots level is very important. And this is linked to the whole school approach as well, where you are involving all the key stakeholders in this fight against gender-based violence. And also I just wanted to add on the question you had asked about the long-term strategies. I think on the long-term strategies, what is very key is to ensure that policies that have been put in place are actually being implemented, because there are a number of countries who have developed a lot of good policies that prevent gender-based violence, but the implementation is a challenge. So as civil society, we need to ensure that all these policies that have been put in place need to be implemented, and we need to follow up and advocate for that. Thank you.
Thank
Hi,
you,
Laura.
Julie. Yes.
Just a small one as well.
No,
Just
no,
to also
it is Lydia, because
Yes.
there are some colleagues that are asking us to make a 5 minutes pause to the interpreters. So let's just make a break, 5 minutes break, and then you can restart. And also I would like to share some experience from Latin America and the Caribbean, okay? So let's give us 5 minutes break. Thank you. But
Okay,
don't
thanks.
go. Sorry, can you restart? Lydia, if you want, please take the floor.
Thank you so much, Laura. Just want to add my voice to the contributions from colleagues to say interventions to respond to SRGBV should look at the drivers. So if interventions focus on what is driving SRGBV, we should be able to address the violence that happens in school. So looking at gender norms, looking at issues of power relations, it's very critical for any intervention to address that. Secondly, interventions should holistically look at the different pieces that make up the school system. A school system is just not the teachers and the learners, but looking at everyone else who comes into contact with learners. Colleagues already talked about the communities. It's critical to engage communities. As we empower learners, as we empower teachers, how are we ensuring that communities also understand what constitutes school-related gender-based violence and what is their role in terms of addressing violence? Additionally, I've seen in most resources the fact that resources address learners and teachers and also forget to look at non-teaching staff. I think it's also critical to look at the school system having other staff other than the teaching staff, other than the head of the school, the deputy head, but look at who else is in the school system who gets into contact with learners. So looking at people who are working at the reception, also matrons, librarian, cleaning staff, every other person who gets into contact with learners, are they able to define what SRGBV is? And are they then, with that understanding, able to then not perpetuate violence in schools? You will then find an example in some countries where violence happens in the hostels, or violence happens at the sporting grounds, or at the reception where the learner comes to pay school fees. So it is very critical that as we work around our interventions, we look at the school in totality. Everyone who comes into contact with learners should be able to understand what constitutes violence, because there are other forms of subtle violence that happens. Those go unnoticed and learners continue to bear the brunt of violence. Thanks, Laura.
Thank you very much, Lydia. I just would like to share as well an experience from Latin America and the Caribbean that we have developed in rural schools in Haiti, Honduras, and Nicaragua. In this case, we engaged the education community to develop research action initiatives. So the students, the teachers, the non-teaching professionals, they were invited to discuss this topic at the schools and with the community. They were invited to raise their expectations, to identify some violent situations, and also to propose some recommendations for the teachers, the principals, but also for the local authorities. So this was a way of using research in a pedagogical way, because they were learning how to, for example, calculate the statistics that they raised at schools. They were learning how to analyze the outcomes of the data that they were gathering. They were learning how to make proposals. So it was a citizenship also learning experience, because they were collectively making recommendations for example, for changing the use of some part of the school, some area of the school where they observed that there were many cases of violence. So this was also a very grassroots experience that was used as a pedagogical tool, but also as an advocacy process with authorities at the local level in rural areas. So I think that this is also an interesting initiative that I would like to share. I will put the link of this experience in the chat box. I saw some comment here. Let me see. Where was it? I wasn't able to open my microphone due to some technical issues, but I would like to vouch on what have been said. Policy and implementation, I know gender-based violence has different faces in every country. All may have draft policies to address a particular gender-based violence, but on how this is magnified is another issue. Monitoring and a strong political way to really pin the perpetrators and take serious moves to penalize them will make it a success. Yes, also alongside prevention, is important to have intervention supporting survivors. And these are some comments that I can see in the chat. Let me check if there is any other raised hand. I don't think so. So maybe we can give 1 minute for closing remarks.
Laura.
Yes.
I had my hand raised. I just want to say a couple
sorry.
of things. Yes, no,
Go ahead.
I would like just to second what Lydia was mentioning of involving the whole school community. That is why I believe not only the whole school approach, but also EI use the term of educational support personnel, because that involves all the different actors that participate in the school setting, and that is the psychologist, the receptionist, the person who comes and help, you know, in the sport ground, and everyone there, because and that is something that we always try to recall in our advocacy strategies, but because we're not only talking about teachers, we're also talking about all the school community. That is one thing. And the second thing is like a takeaway that personally, you know, I took from a symposium organized by UNGE and UNICEF and UNESCO in the Asia Pacific, is the importance of collecting evidence and having reliable data, because most of what our colleagues have said about policy, that involves also monitoring strategies. So how can we monitor if we don't have adequate instruments, if we don't have reliable national data or even international one? We have seen some gaps that there are, you know, in some big assessment systems, but also having reliable and good data that can tell us, you know, what is the situation nationally, regionally, and also internationally. That is a powerful instrument for us, not only for us, but also for the group, for the campaign, to follow up on how policies are being implemented.
Thank you very much, Gina. Zainab, do you want to make some closing remarks?
Thank you. I think I was able to unmute. Okay, great. Thank you very much. I just wanted to share few opinions regarding the grassroots organizations action, and I think this is a very important point. And I would like to, again, as we do in many different spaces, make a plea for increasing and making available funding to grassroots organizations, especially youth-led, young feminist-led, and women-led grassroots organizations. They are underfunded, and there is full evidence supporting that. So for SRGBV, for any type of and all forms of GBV, but in particular for SRGBV, if we want to elevate the expertise and evidence and experience of grassroots level, this requires funding, and we can no longer expect, especially young people, to take action at the expense of their time, at the expense of their studies, and demands free of charge labor. So let's also try to advocate this as part of our work. Let's join forces to raise this voice together. So I believe this is an important aspect that further needs to be elevated to the global level. Thank you very much for having us here. It was a pleasure to be with all of you.
No, the pleasure was ours. Julie, do you want to make some closing remarks? 1 minute, please. Or Lydia?
Thanks.
Go ahead, Julie.
Thanks, Laura. And oh, my camera is not on. Okay. Thank you, Laura. And thanks to all our panelists for the very informative information that you have shared with us on ending school-related gender-based violence. What I can say in conclusion is that let's continue the discussion. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, that GCE has got a gender learning community. So please enroll and be part of the gender learning community so that we continue with these discussions. As also mentioned, that this is only the first of the series that we are doing. We will have other webinars starting from January. So please, when you see the notice for these webinars, please register so that we continue the discussion. I also highlighted at the beginning that data seems to be a problem. So indeed, as Gina has mentioned, it's important that we get accurate data so that it can support us in our advocacy work, as well as support the governments in decision making when they are coming up with their policies and strategies on how to address gender-based violence. So thank you very much. I hope I kept to my 1 minute.
Thank you, Judy. Lydia, do you want to?
Oh, sorry, I forgot one thing, just to thank our interpreters as well for interpreting throughout this webinar. I know the notice was short and they were very busy, but they took the time to come and be with us so that we are able to, all participants are able to follow the discussions. So really, thank you so much to our interpreters, and thanks to Salma and other colleagues in the Secretariat as well for making this possible. Thank you.
Nothing much to add, Laura, but just to thank our panelists. We learned a lot just in this discussion, and as Julie said, please join us in the next coming webinars. Thank you so much. Over to you, Laura.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here in this very comprehensive and pleasant conversation. The topic is not so pleasant, but I think that we have raised lots of important issues that have to be retaken moving forward. So let's keep working to end gender-based violence at schools together as a movement and as an education movement, and maybe we can make some bridges with other movements, feminist movements. UNGAI has a feminist network for gender transformative education, so it's a very interesting initiative that GCE is also engaging with. Also the learning communities, as Judy has said, and the importance of making advocacy at the national, regional, and global levels. So thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, and let's keep in touch. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye, and thank you, Laura, for the good moderation.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.